Today, folks, I got a crazy question for you younger, Canadians. Do you think the Canadian dream is dead? Ever since the Liberal Party took over in the recent election, a lot of my friends have been standing up thinking housing is going to be unaffordable for the rest of their lives, that they've been left behind. And I'm not somebody that's ever relied on the government personally for my financial freedom or future. I've followed the basic rules of living frugally, saving as much of my money as possible, and investing it as early as possible, which put me in a position to actually afford a piece of real estate in Toronto. But I still recognize that this isn't the world our parents grew up in, right? Like, I'm in my 30s and was finally able to buy a piece of real estate. You can't just go out and get a normal job today and afford the average cost of living, especially in a place like in Ontario or Vancouver. But nonetheless, I want to break down the recent policies that are coming into place with Mark Carney as the new Prime Minister of Canada, and if there, as from an investor mindset, ways to make money off this as well. Can you invest into this future if you're an investor, and can you actually use these prefab homes today to actually start building an affordable place to live if you are a younger person who's been saving money and wants to find a way into the housing market? So if you are on a path to financial independence, if you damn well one day want to retire early, join me on that journey by simply hitting that subscribe button, folks, because this really reminds me of what's kind of gone on in San Francisco. The US, I think, has many states that exemplify what happens when real estate gets expensive, which is a free market product, might I add. Real estate isn't a job left up to the government to decide what those prices are. It doesn't care about your income. It is just a free market product, and where the demand is and the supply can't be met, the prices naturally are going to inflate. That's why you see cheaper homes in Alberta versus Toronto or Vancouver, and same in the United States when we're looking at a place like San Francisco, where they've already kind of jumped ahead into doing a cheaper alternative, which are these boat homes, which you can surprisingly find in a few areas, which I think is just super fascinating, because San Francisco is a really interesting, like, dystopian place with a lot of crime, a lot of homelessness, and you see the divide once you get these massive divisions in housing, which is why we can't let Canada get to that level, in my opinion. So we got to figure out how to fix it as Canadians. And I want to talk about Mark Carney's plan here, and we're going to go through this in a moment. But firstly, I just want to say what I've discussed with my friends long before the Liberals even won, because this is something that, has been a discussion for years. And we've talked about it, say, up in cottage country, where some of my friends and my family live, discussing how can they buy a house when the average house is somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000, and that's the cheaper end of the spectrum, right? And we've talked about buying plots of land, because you can get small plots of land for anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 in actually pretty reasonable areas. And we've talked about this and taking some of these plots, and going in and figuring out what the cost would be to put a prefab home on it. Because, Amazon could technically be an investment into prefab, because look at these, homes that you can buy that they'll just ship in. They're fairly cheap, going up to $20,000. And if you can buy a home for $50,000, or a property or a plot of land for $50,000 to $200,000, buy a prefab home, and you can expand on that as time goes on. And we've kind of calculated the cost to get sewage hooked up, hydro hooked up, go through all the hoops of regulation. And you could easily do this for under $500,000. I think we calculated it being somewhere between $380,000 and $450,000 within reason, within the cottage country area. Now, that's going to be more expensive toward the city. Land is just expensive out here, but nonetheless, it's still a much more approachable way. And I know personal friends that have actually built container homes, but now that it's like an easy, more acceptable thing in the economy, I don't know why people shit on it so much, because I do see a lot of people that say this is a horrible way of living or something. And I think it's a very reasonable way not to only get into a property, but start expanding on it as time goes on as well. Now, if we take a look at what their actual plan is here, let's just kind of read through this, and then we'll take a look at where housing sits today, and then how you can kind of invest into this knowledge. But let's just listen.
We used to build things in this country. After the Second World War, Canada faced a housing crisis. The government built prefabricated homes that were easy to assemble and inexpensive. And those homes are still here 80 years later. Now we're in another housing crisis. And it's time your government got back into the business of building affordable homes. We will build new homes for Canadians at a pace not seen since the Second World War. We'll build a Canada you can afford.
So it doesn't matter who won the election. This was going to be a largely debated topic, regardless of how you feel about policy out there, considering when you look at the average sold price across our entire province is $678,000. And the only thing I can recommend if I was younger, and this could just be me speaking out my ass, but I would probably move to Alberta, which me and my wife almost did. And if I was, just getting involved, I was in my early 20s, I would probably go straight basically into the trades, because that's where the demand is clearly going to be. hopefully get into an apprenticeship, start making somewhere between 50 and 80K, live with a bunch of people, focus on work for 2 or 3 years, and try and put half my paycheck away, maybe save up 50 to 100K as, a 15 or 20% deposit on a 300K to maybe 500K property somewhere in Alberta. That would be like my go-to plan if I had to start over today, because let's be real, $1 million, like I literally told my realtor when we bought this condo, as we were looking for condos to buy, that if I had to put $1 million into an 800 square foot apartment, I'm leaving this province. And luckily that wasn't the case, and we were able to find an older building with much more square footage at a much lower price. But yeah, it's ridiculous if you live in Vancouver or Toronto to try and afford living here if you're not making a six-figure income as a household. And even still, you need to be making some upper ends, like at least a couple $100,000 plus a year to justify the cost of living in these provinces. But nonetheless, yeah, I can see a lot of thought around, you have to be, interprovincial at this point, if you're a younger person, to be a little bit more malleable than you might have been in our parents' generation. But if we take a look at some investments, and what I find so fascinating about this is, I was asking myself, how as an investor, where can you go to make money off this? Like, if you wanted to invest and try to stimulate this aspect of the economy, like, where would you go? And there are far and few in between companies. I was surprised, some private companies, but very hard to find prefab home companies, with the exception of, what's been on Amazon here. And there's one company I came across that not only is publicly traded, but actually, checked all the boxes for where I think, even if you're a dividend investor, to get quite a good return at a reasonable valuation today, especially if they're able to get a foothold in this new kind of prefab home industry. And that is Atco, a company I've never heard of before in my life. The performance is quite incredible, pays almost a 4% dividend yield, that it has basically doubled in the last decade. And when I kind of dove into their financials, the revenue growth has been pretty reasonable since 2021. I mean, it's not a huge growing company, but it operates as a massive utility. The balance sheet for this kind of company is reasonable: $18 billion in liabilities, $26 billion in assets. I've kind of dug through it. Their payout ratio is like 50%. And we can see that this company basically offers essential services to communities. They're basically a utility company, like a broad, diversified utility company with renewable energy, space rentals, electric transmission and distribution, gas, natural gas storage. They have ports, they got modular housing, they're into the carbon sequestration, hydrogen production. And the deeper I dove into this, the more I was intrigued, because it kind of reminds me a little bit of Fortis as a utility play, because it's a globally diversified company with a lot of focus in Canada. And we can take a look that part of their growth strategy is delving into this modular housing with rapid deployment, superior quality and consistency, improved safety, longer warranties, higher energy efficiency. And I wish I could be in the government to get an ear on the door, or as a fly on the wall, to figure out what companies are they stimulating with that massive amount of injection, because I think they're looking at putting like $25 billion into financing innovative prefabricated homes. So it'll be neat to see how they decide to go about doing this and providing $10 billion in low-cost financing and capital affordability, right? So if we take a look a little deeper into this, you can see that the supply side crisis they talk about immensely here. And this is not the government's fault. A lot of people think it's because of immigration, but it's not. I mean, think about it right now. Millions of people are leaving the cities because their visas are up, and the government's not allowing any more like foreign students to come in here unless they're going to work here. I mean, they've really cut back a lot. We're seeing much more supply on the market than we ever have, a lot less liquidity. It's hard to move real estate. Your prices aren't really coming down. In fact, in a lot of cases, prices are still going up, which shows you that it isn't necessarily an immigration problem as much as it is just where housing has come to thanks to policies. The cost to build is insane as it is. So if they can loosen some of that up a bit, it might help. But the reality is it's a lot more complicated than waving a wand and watching prices drop in half, right? So you had the pandemic, inflation, which really, hindered building, interest rate spikes that bankrupted a lot of construction companies. My dad works in construction. It's a very tough industry and has been for the last 5 years, that led to some of these problems, right? So now we're looking at the solutions as hopefully the economy starts to stabilize after the whiplash and the wicked volatility from the pandemic. So this company is definitely using this as part of their growth driver, and I would like to listen to an earnings call and get a more clear understanding of it. But nonetheless, fascinating to kind of deep dive down into and get a better understanding of. I'm surprised this company never came up on my radar. It is a bit of a smaller cap company at $5 billion, which is great. So there could be some growth drivers behind it. As the stock hasn't really done much since 2014, 2015. I think this is the best case right now that I found for investment in this Liberal Party policy. But nonetheless, guys, I'd love to know what you think. how you're kind of skating through the current market environment here in Canada. I know it's tough, but I've always been a guy that's like, do a side hustle, get a main job, understand corporate investing, become a sole proprietor, take advantage of write-offs, do everything you can to squeeze every dime, stop eating out all the time. I feel like, getting rich in the market has always been the same. It doesn't matter what generation you're in. The tools and the rules that follow always require the exact same thing. It's just most people don't have the patience to do it for a decade. It's just like, I think they said if you could put 50% of your income away for like 15 years, you could basically retire at 50%, which is it's a hard thing to do, and it's hard discipline. But I'm somebody that has largely been able to do a lot of that, and my wife and I became millionaires because we both follow the kind of the same rhetoric of live frugally. We put half our income away for a decade and invested it in this market that has been very generous as well. And I hope those opportunities persist for anybody else out there and that are willing to be frugal and put the mindset behind it. But again, I'd love to know what you guys think in that comment section below.